The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Sterling's books. As Emma rose, Sterling stared at the stack of medical bills scattered across her father's antique desk. Each number seemed to mock her, growing larger and more impossible with every glance. The surgery her father needed would cost more than their little bookstore could earn in 5 years. And the bank had already refused their loan application twice. "Sweetheart, you don't have to worry about this," Theodore Sterling said weakly from his chair by the window, his once robust frame now frail from months of illness. The former literature professor's eyes still held their familiar warmth, but Emma could see the pain he tried so hard to hide. "Papa, please don't say that," Emma whispered, her voice trembling as she gathered the bills. "We'll find a way." But as she looked around the bookstore that had been their family's pride for 3 generations, Emma felt desperation clawing at her chest. The shelves that had once overflowed with eager customers now stood mostly empty. Victims of online retailers and changing times, the few loyal patrons who still visited weren't enough to keep them afloat, let alone pay for the life-saving surgery her father needed, 20 miles across the city. In the gleaming glass tower of Blackwood Industries, David Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, surveying his empire with the same cold satisfaction he felt after every successful acquisition. At 34, he controlled more wealth and power than most men could dream of, but success had come at a price he'd been willing to pay: his humanity. "Sir, your mother is here to see you," James Mitchell, his assistant, and perhaps his only friend, announced from the doorway. David's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Victoria Blackwood never visited unless she wanted something, and her wants typically involved his personal life, the one area where he refused to compromise. "Send her in," he said curtly, not turning from the window. Victoria swept into the office like a force of nature, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. Even at 60, she commanded attention with her perfectly styled silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "David, darling, we need to discuss your image problem," she began without preamble, settling into the leather chair across from his desk with practiced elegance. "I don't have an image problem, Mother. I have a business to run. That scandal with Rebecca's Talal interview has damaged the Blackwood name," Victoria continued, ignoring his dismissal. "The board is getting nervous. Investors want stability, and a bachelor billionaire with a reputation for cold-hearted dealings isn't exactly reassuring." David finally turned, his green eyes arctic. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Marriage," Victoria said simply. "A nice, respectable wife who can soften your image. Show the world that David Blackwood is capable of human emotion." The suggestion hit him like a physical blow. Marriage meant vulnerability, meant giving someone power to hurt him the way Rebecca had tried to do. Absolutely not. Think about it practically, David. You need someone who won't threaten your control, someone grateful enough to follow the rules. A business arrangement, nothing more. As his mother outlined her calculated vision of his future, David felt the familiar ice settle deeper around his heart. Love was a luxury he couldn't afford, a weakness that had already cost him too much. 3 days later, Emma stood outside the imposing Blackwood Industries building, her heart hammering against her ribs. The plan forming in her mind was desperate, perhaps even insane. But desperation made people brave in ways they never expected. She'd spent hours researching David Blackwood, learning about his business practices, his ruthless efficiency, and, most importantly, his need for a wife to improve his public image. The society pages had been full of speculation about his romantic life since his ex-girlfriend's vindictive interview. The elevator ride to the 50th floor felt eternal, each floor marking another step toward a decision that would change everything. Emma clutched her worn leather purse, inside of which lay her father's medical reports and a proposal that would either save her family or destroy her future. David's office was exactly what she'd expected: cold, intimidating, and designed to make visitors feel small. The man behind the mahogany desk didn't look up when she entered. His attention focused on documents that probably represented more money than she'd see in a lifetime. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. He glanced up then, and Emma felt her breath catch. His photographs hadn't captured the intensity of his green eyes or the sharp beauty of his features. He He was devastatingly handsome in a way that seemed almost cruel, like a work of art designed to break hearts. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice deep and cultured. "James tells me you have a proposition that might interest me." Emma lifted her chin, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed. "I know you need a wife for appearances. I need money for my father's surgery. I'm proposing a marriage of convenience." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or amusement. "And what makes you think you'd be suitable for such an arrangement?" "I won't want more than you're willing to give," Emma said quietly. "I won't try to change you or demand love you don't feel. I just need enough money to save my father's life, and in return I'll be whatever kind of wife you need me to be." David studied her for a long moment, taking in her simple blue dress, her nervous hands, the desperate hope she couldn't quite hide. She was nothing like the sophisticated women who usually crossed his path. There was something pure about her, untouched by the cynicism that colored his world. "This would be a business arrangement," he said finally. "Nothing more. No romance. No expectations of affection. You'd live in my penthouse, but we'd maintain separate lives. Public appearances when necessary, but otherwise complete independence. Understand. The marriage would last 2 years, after which we'd quietly divorce. You'd receive a settlement, but during the marriage, your needs would be provided for." Emma nodded, though something inside her chest felt hollow. She'd always imagined marriage differently, filled with laughter, shared dreams, the kind of love her parents had built over decades. Instead, she was negotiating her future like a business contract. "There's one more condition," David continued, sliding a document across the desk. "Complete confidentiality. Nothing about our arrangement or the reasons behind it can ever be disclosed." As Emma signed her name for the final time, she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But her father's gentle smile flashed before her eyes, and she knew some sacrifices were worth making. Even if they broke your heart in the process, the wedding 3 weeks later was everything Emma had dreamed of, and nothing she had wanted. St. Michael's Cathedral buzzed with the city's elite, all eager to witness what the media had dubbed the romance of the century. Politicians, business moguls, and socialites filled the pews, their diamonds glittering like captured stars under the stained glass windows. But Emma knew the truth. She was marrying a beautiful stranger, a man whose touch she had never felt, whose heart remained as cold as the contracts they had both signed. David stood at the altar in his custom-tailored black tuxedo, commanding respect from everyone in the cathedral. To him, marriage was simply another business transaction, another strategic move in the complex game of corporate power. The organ music swelled as Emma walked down the aisle on her father's arm, looking ethereal in ivory silk that seemed to float around her like clouds. Every step felt like walking toward a beautiful prison, but when she saw her father's proud smile, she knew she was doing the right thing. Their vows were recited with perfect precision, each word carefully chosen by lawyers, rather than hearts. When David lifted her veil and kissed her, his lips were soft but emotionless, a performance for the cameras that would splash their union. Across tomorrow's headlines, Emma closed her eyes and pretended she felt something, anything beyond the hollow ache in her chest. She was married now, but to a stranger who looked at her like she was just another acquisition in his vast empire. As they posed for photographs and greeted guests, Emma played her role perfectly, smiling and accepting congratulations while her new husband conducted business in the corners of the reception hall. They were married, but they remained strangers, sharing nothing more than a legal document and matching rings that felt heavier than chains. The penthouse that would be her new home was a monument to success, all sharp angles, expensive art, and cold perfection. 2 master bedrooms sat at opposite ends of the sprawling space, a physical reminder of the emotional distance between them. "Your room is on the east side," David said, without warmth as they entered. "I've had clothes ordered for you suitable for the events we'll need to attend. James will brief you on our schedule tomorrow." "Thank you," Emma whispered, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. "This is what we both wanted," David continued, his voice neutral. "Mutually beneficial arrangement. Clean, simple, effective." He disappeared into his study, leaving her alone in the beautiful cage she'd chosen. Emma wondered if she'd just made a deal with the devil himself. But her father was safe now, the surgery scheduled for the following week. Some sacrifices were worth making, even if they left your heart in pieces. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered like a circuit board, beautiful and cold. Emma pressed her palm against the glass and wondered if the man she'd married was capable of feeling anything at all, or if she'd just sentenced herself to a lifetime of loving someone carved from ice. The morning after the storm brought crystalline sunlight streaming through the mansion's towering windows, casting rainbow prisms across the marble floors. Emma arrived at work an hour early, her mind racing with thoughts of the previous night's encounter. She'd barely slept, replaying David's broken words and the raw vulnerability she'd witnessed in that basement shelter. As she prepared coffee in the mansion's industrial kitchen, she wondered if David would pretend their midnight conversation had never happened. In her experience, wealthy people often compartmentalize their moments of weakness, treating them like temporary lapses to be forgotten, rather than genuine human connections. Her question was answered when David appeared in the kitchen doorway. At 7 sharp, looking remarkably different from the man she'd found crying 12 hours earlier. His hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit impeccable, but his eyes held a new warmth when they met hers. "Hey, good morning, Emma," he said, his voice carrying a gentleness that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to thank you for last night for listening." "You don't need to thank me," Emma replied, pouring coffee into his usual ceramic mug. "How are you feeling?" David accepted the coffee, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Better, clearer. I've been thinking about what you said about things changing rather than ending." He paused, studying her face. "I have a proposition for you." Emma raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. I need someone I can trust. Someone who sees me as David, rather than David Harrison of Harrison Industries. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." He set down his mug and looked directly at her. "I'd like you to be my assistant during this crisis. Not my housekeeper, my partner in figuring out how to save my company." The offer hung in the air between them like morning mist. Emma felt her heart skip a beat, not just from the professional opportunity, but from the trust implicit in his words. "I don't know anything about business," she said carefully. "But you know about people. You know about surviving when everything falls apart. And you know about rebuilding." David's voice grew more animated. "I've been thinking all night about what my father would do, what my grandfather would do. He didn't build this company by hiding in boardrooms. He built it by understanding what people needed, by connecting with them." Emma studied his face, seeing the determination that had replaced the despair of the previous night. "What exactly are you asking me to do? Help me remember who I am beneath all the corporate machinery. Help me find a way to save Harrison Industries that doesn't involve sacrificing everything I believe in." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "And help me figure out how to expose the man who's been stealing from us without destroying what's left of the company in the process." Emma felt a flutter of excitement mixed with terror. This was so far outside her comfort zone, so removed from her world of cleaning supplies and laundry schedules. But something in David's eyes, something desperate and hopeful, made her decision. For her. "Okay," she said simply. "But I have conditions." David's eyebrows shot up. "Conditions?" "First, you pay me the same salary I make as a housekeeper. I won't accept charity, and I won't let you pay me more just because you feel grateful." Emma's voice was firm. "Second, when this is over, if you want me to go back to housekeeping, I go back with no hard feelings. And third, you have to promise me you'll eat actual meals. I can't help you save your company if you collapse from malnutrition." David stared at her for a moment, then broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in weeks. "Deal. But I have one condition of my own." "What's that?" "You have to promise to tell me when I'm being an idiot. Rich people aren't used to hearing the truth, and I have a feeling I'm going to need a lot of it in the coming weeks." Emma grinned. "Oh, I think I can handle that." Their first order of business was understanding the full scope of the crisis. David led Emma to his study, a room she'd cleaned hundreds of times but never truly seen. The walls were lined with family photos and awards, testimonials to 3 generations of Harrison's success. but the massive oak desk was buried under stacks of financial reports, legal documents, and newspaper clippings with headlines that made Emma's stomach clench. Harrison Industries stock plummets as embezzlement. Scandal unfolds, CEO David Harrison under fire as company faces bankruptcy, the fall of a dynasty. How one man's greed brought down a Seattle empire. David sat heavily in his leather chair, gesturing to the chaos. This is what I'm dealing with. My business partner, James Mitchell, has been systematically stealing from our accounts for 2 years. He's covered it up brilliantly, making it look like poor management decisions on my part. Picked up one of the financial reports, the numbers swimming before her eyes. How much did he steal? $12 million? Maybe more? David's voice was tight with controlled anger. The board wants me to step down quietly, let them bring in new management to clean up the mess. But if I do that, James gets away with it, and 100 families lose their jobs? What? So what's the alternative? I fight. I find proof of what he's done, expose him, and try to save the company. David looked up at her, his blue eyes intense. But I can't do it alone. I need someone who can think outside the corporate box, someone who understands what's really at stake here. Emma set down the report and walked to the window overlooking the city. Seattle stretched out below them, a tapestry of neighborhoods, where people like her lived and worked and struggled to make ends meet. Those 100 families you mentioned, they're not just numbers on a spreadsheet, are they? No, they're people like Maria in accounting, who's putting her daughter through medical school. Like Tom in shipping, who just had his first grandchild. Like dozens of others who've worked for this company for years, who trusted us to take care of them. Emma turned back to David, seeing him not as the wealthy CEO who signed her paychecks, but as a man carrying the weight of responsibility for people he genuinely cared about. Then we fight. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Emma found herself thrust into a world she'd never imagined. Sitting in on phone calls with lawyers, reviewing contracts, and learning the intricate details of corporate finance. David was a patient teacher, explaining complex concepts and terms she could understand, never making her feel stupid for asking questions. But more than that, she began to see the man behind the executive facade. David worked 8-hour days, survived on coffee and determination, and carried the burden of his employees' livelihoods like a physical weight. He was brilliant and driven, but also kind and surprisingly humble. You know, Emma said one evening, as they sat in his study, surrounded by evidence of James Mitchell's crimes, "You're not what I expected when I first started working here." David looked up from the legal brief he'd been reading. "What did you expect? Someone colder, I guess. More ... entitled." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm sorry, that sounds terrible." "No, it doesn't. It sounds honest." David sat down the brief and leaned back in his chair. "I probably was more like that before all this happened. It's easy to lose sight of what matters when you're insulated by money and success. What matters to you now?" David was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on a framed photo of his parents on the desk. "Doing right by the people who depend on me, making sure my father's legacy means something more than just profit margins." He looked at her directly, not letting the people who've shown me kindness down. Emma felt something flutter in her chest at his words, a dangerous warmth that had nothing to do with their professional partnership. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the stack of invoices they still needed to review. Their breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon when Emma was organizing David's personal files. She found a folder labeled JM Personal that contained correspondence between David and James Mitchell dating back 5 years. Most of it was routine business communication, but one letter made her pause. "David," she called, excitement building in her voice, "you need to see this." David crossed the room quickly, reading over her shoulder. The letter was from James to David, dated 18 months ago, discussing a private investment opportunity that would benefit both of us significantly. "This is it," David breathed. "This is proof that he was planning something. If we can connect this to the missing funds." They worked through the night, cross-referencing dates and transactions. Building a timeline of James Mitchell's deception, Emma's fresh perspective proved invaluable. She spotted patterns that David, too close to the situation, had missed. As dawn broke over Seattle, they had assembled a comprehensive case against James Mitchell. The evidence was damning. Forged signatures, dummy accounts, fictitious vendors. It was enough to clear David's name and send James to prison. "We did it," David said, his voice filled with disbelief and exhaustion. "We actually did it." Emma looked at the man who had become so much more than her employer over the past week. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes red from lack of sleep. But he was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since she'd known him. "Make a good team," she said softly. "We do," David agreed, moving closer to her. "Emma!" The study door burst open, interrupting whatever David had been about to say. A woman stood in the doorway, tall and elegant, with platinum blonde hair and the kind of effortless beauty that spoke of expensive salons and personal trainers. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than Emma made in 6 months. "David, darling," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight British accent. "I came as soon as I heard about your troubles." Emma felt her heart sink as she recognized the woman from Society Pages, Victoria Sterling, David's ex-fiancée, daughter of a media mogul, and exactly the kind of person who belonged in David's world. "Victoria," David said, his voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" "Helping, of course." Victoria glided into the room, her gaze briefly flickering over Emma before dismissing her entirely. "Daddy's lawyers have been looking into your situation. We think we can arrange a merger with Sterling Media that would solve all your financial problems." Emma watched the interaction with growing unease. Doria spoke with the casual confidence of someone who had never been denied anything, who assumed that money could solve any problem. But more troubling was the way she looked at David, like he was a prize to be won rather than a person to be understood. "That's generous," David said carefully, "but I'm not sure a merger is the answer." "Don't be silly, darling. You can't possibly handle this crisis alone." Victoria's laugh was like silver bells, beautiful but somehow cold. "You need someone who understands your world, someone who can navigate these troubled waters with you." Emma felt like an intruder in her own success story. The easy partnership she'd built with David over the past week suddenly felt fragile. Threatened by the appearance of someone who belonged in his social circle in a way Emma never could. "Actually," David said, his voice growing stronger, "I'm not alone. Emma has been helping me, and we've made significant progress." Victoria's gaze shifted to Emma, really seeing her for the first time. "Emma, your housekeeper?" There was no malice in her voice, just genuine confusion, as if the idea of a maid being useful for anything beyond cleaning was incomprehensible. "My partner," David corrected firmly. "We've found evidence that will clear my name and expose the real criminal." Victoria's expression shifted, becoming more calculating. "How wonderful. But surely you understand that this is just the beginning? Even if you clear your name, the company will need massive restructuring, new leadership, a complete image overhaul. These aren't tasks for... She gestured vaguely at Emma. Well, for someone without the proper background." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. She had spent the past week proving herself, working alongside David as an equal, contributing ideas and insights that had helped solve an impossible problem. To have it all dismissed because of her background, her class, her lack of pedigree, was infuriating. But before she could respond, David stepped forward, his voice cold in a way Emma had never heard before. "Victoria, I appreciate your concern, but I don't need your father's money or your advice. Emma and I have handled this situation just fine on our own." "David, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm also being loyal to the person who stood by me when everyone else had written me off." David's gaze found Emma's, and she saw something there that made her pulse quicken. "Emma saw something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. That's not something I take lightly." Victoria's composure cracked slightly, her perfect smile faltering. "I see. Well, I suppose I should let you get back to ... whatever it is you're doing." She moved toward the door, then paused. "But David, do remember that when this is all over, you'll need to rebuild not just your company, but your reputation. And for that, You'll need the right kind of people by your side. After Victoria left, the study felt smaller somehow, charged with tension and unspoken emotions. Emma stared at the evidence they'd compiled, suddenly seeing it differently. Yes, they'd solved the immediate crisis, but Victoria was right about one thing. The real challenges were just beginning. "Emma," David said softly, "I'm sorry about that." Victoria has never been known for her tact. "She's not wrong, though," Emma replied, her voice quiet. "I am just your housekeeper. I don't know anything about rebuilding companies or managing reputations." "That's not who you are," David said, moving closer. "You're the person who found me at my lowest point and helped me remember who I wanted to be. You're the person who worked 18-hour days to help me save my company. You're the person what?" Emma looked up at him, seeing something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Who I'm falling in love with," David said simply. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge that could either connect their worlds or collapse under the weight of their differences. Emma felt her heart racing, torn between the joy of hearing those words and the fear of what they might mean. "David," she whispered, "we're from different worlds, are we?" He reached out, gently touching her face. "'Cause this past week, in this room working together, I felt more at home than I have in years." Emma closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. She wanted to believe it could work, that love could bridge the gap between their different backgrounds. But Victoria's words echoed in her mind, a reminder of the challenges they would face. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we take it one day at a time," David replied. "We expose James Mitchell, we save the company, and we figure out what comes next together." Emma looked at this man who had gone from broken to hopeful, from her employer to her partner to something much more complicated. She thought of her father's words about helping others, about choosing who you wanted to be. She thought of Rosa, still in college, still depending on her. She thought of the 100 families whose livelihoods hung in the balance. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Together." As they prepared to present their evidence to the board of directors, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to step into a much larger battle. They had won this skirmish, but the war for their future, both professional and personal, was just beginning. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the study as they gathered their papers. Their evidence, their hopes for the future. Emma looked at David, seeing not the wealthy CEO she'd once cleaned up after, but a man who had chosen to fight for what was right, even when it would have been easier to give up. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The Harrison Industries boardroom had never felt more imposing than it did on that crisp October morning. Emma sat beside David at the mahogany conference table, acutely aware of how out of place she looked among the sea of expensive suits and corporate power players. The board members filed in one by one, their faces grave, their whispered conversations creating a low buzz of tension that made her stomach clench. David squeezed her hand briefly under the table, a gesture of support that steadied her nerves. They had spent the previous night reviewing their presentation, organizing evidence, and preparing for every possible question. Emma had insisted on being present, despite David's gentle suggestions that she might be more comfortable waiting. In his office? "This is my fight too," she had told him. "I helped build this case, and I want to see it through." Now, as the board chairman called the meeting to order, Emma wondered if she had made the right choice. These people controlled billions of dollars, made decisions that affected thousands of lives, moved in circles she could barely comprehend. "What right did she have to be here?" "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of the moment. "I've called this emergency meeting to present evidence that will not only clear my name but expose the real criminal behind our company's financial troubles." For the next hour, David methodically laid out their case against James Mitchell. Emma watched as the board members' expressions shifted from skepticism to shock to anger as the scope of the embezzlement became clear. When David presented the letter Emma had found, it's the one that proved Mitchell's premeditation, she felt a surge of pride at her contribution. "This is devastating," said Margaret Chen, the board's longest-serving member. "James Mitchell has been stealing from us for 2 years, and we had no idea. The question now," said Robert Williams, the chairman, is what we do about it. David, you've proven your innocence, but the company is still in crisis. We need strong leadership to guide us through this transition. Emma held her breath as David stood to address the room. She had seen him practice this speech a dozen times, but she knew how much it meant to him. I understand your concerns, David said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 generations of Harrison leadership. But I'm not just asking you to clear my name. I'm asking you to trust me to rebuild this company the right way, with transparency, integrity, and a focus on the people who make Harrison Industries what it is. That's all very noble, David, said Patricia Frost, a woman whose steel-gray hair matched her cold demeanor. But noble intentions don't restore investor confidence or replace stolen funds. Actually, they do, Emma said, the words escaping. Before she could stop them, every head in the room turned toward her, and Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. But David nodded encouragingly, and she found the courage to continue. I've worked in this company for 3 years, she said, her voice growing stronger. I've seen how the employees talk about David, how they respect him, how they're willing to work harder for him than they would for anyone else. That's not something you can buy with investor money or corporate restructuring. That's earned. Patricia Frost's eyebrows rose. When you are, Emma Rodriguez, she replied, lifting her chin. I'm David's partner in this investigation. His partner? The woman's tone was dismissive. I was under the impression you were his housekeeper. Emma felt the familiar sting of class discrimination, but this time it only strengthened her resolve. I am his housekeeper, and his partner, and the person who found the evidence that proved his innocence. Sometimes the most important insights come from people who aren't afraid to see the truth. David stepped forward, his voice carrying a note of steel that Emma had never heard before. Emma Rodriguez is one of the smartest, most dedicated people I've ever worked with. She's contributed more to saving this company than anyone in this room, and I won't tolerate anyone dismissing her contributions because of her job title. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Emma saw some board members exchange glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. Robert Williams cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand. Hi, David. What's your plan for moving forward? David launched into his vision for the company's future. Outlining strategies for rebuilding investor confidence, implementing new oversight procedures, and expanding their community outreach programs. Emma watched him transform from the broken man she'd found in the basement to the natural leader he was meant to be.